Chapter 1: The Silence Between Worlds. Why Isolation Was the First Gate. There is a place most people never reach, not because it is hidden behind walls or mountains, but because it lies behind everything familiar. It is not found on maps or marked by symbols, and yet the ancients knew it well. They called it the silence between worlds, a liminal zone where language collapses, where memory dissolves, and where the soul begins to stir from its slumber. This was the first gate, not the chanting of sacred names, not the studying of celestial diagrams. No, before a seeker could glimpse the divine, they had to vanish, not physically but energetically, from the world they thought they knew. Imagine an initiate, young, trembling, yet burning with a desire no language can fully express. They arrive at the threshold of the temple, barefoot and bare-souled. The high priest does not greet them with words. Instead, he gestures toward a passage, narrow, dark, carved into stone. There is no instruction, only silence, and in that silence, the initiate understands. This is the beginning. For days, sometimes weeks, they remain in seclusion. No contact, no sound, no mirrors in which to remember who they once were. Food is sparse, light even sparser. The world begins to fade. Time blurs. The mind, accustomed to chatter and distraction, turns inward. And what it finds there is not peace. Not yet. What it finds is chaos. 1,000 unfinished thoughts, fragments of memories, echoes of fears, questions unanswered, wounds unhealed. This is where the true work begins. Because the silence between worlds is not empty. It is full of everything we try to avoid when surrounded by people, noise, and tasks. In the absence of external stimulation, the initiate confronts the internal mirror. And that mirror does not flatter. It shows them the patterns they inherited, the beliefs they absorbed, the lies they told themselves to feel safe. And slowly, something begins to happen. A shedding, a remembering. Ancient traditions understood that we do not step into the sacred carrying the baggage of our conditioning. That which is divine cannot be seen through the lens of ego, fear, or identity. And so, isolation was not a punishment. It was a purification, a necessary forgetting. Because only in forgetting who we are not can we begin to remember who we truly are. In Egypt, those who entered the house of life underwent 40 days of silence. Dwelling alone among symbolic relics meant not to teach, but to awaken. In India, yogis retreated into caves, not to escape life, but to find the version of themselves untouched by it. In the high Andes, shamans fasted on mountaintops, listening not to words, but to wind and stone. All across the ancient world, isolation was not a retreat from reality. It was an entrance into a deeper one. The modern world teaches us the opposite. It tells us to stay connected, to stay updated, to fill every moment with stimulation, entertainment, or productivity. Silence is seen as awkward, stillness as laziness, loneliness as a defect to be cured. But this was not how the ancients lived. They saw isolation not as abandonment, but as alignment, a moment of recalibration, where the soul could rise above the noise and hear its own song again. There is a reason divine memory cannot be accessed in a crowd. The soul speaks in symbols, in subtle energies, in dreams and synchronicities. And these voices are drowned in the clamor of the mundane. Divine memory, that sacred knowing which spans lifetimes, that timeless awareness that whispers not what you must become, but what you have always been. It begins to return only when the world is silenced. And here lies the paradox. We fear solitude, yet we crave truth. We avoid stillness, yet long for clarity. The initiate was not made in public. The initiate was born in the womb of silence, in the hush of the unseen, in the breath between thoughts. This is why the first gate is always inward. Not because it is easy, but because it is essential. For in the silence between worlds, something ancient awakens. Not a voice, not a thought, but a presence. And when that presence rises, not with the mind, but with every cell of your being, you have crossed the threshold. And nothing, no doctrine, no teacher, no book can replace that knowing. It is this moment that marks the true beginning of the path. Everything before was preparation, everything after transformation. But without silence, there is no doorway. Without isolation, there is no return. And so the ancients sent their seekers away, not to abandon them, but to prepare them, to strip them down to essence, to remove the distractions so that when they re-entered the world, they would no longer be of it. They would carry the silence within. They would remember, because once you have heard the silence between worlds, the noise can no longer deceive you. You have seen the hidden. You have heard the eternal. And the memory, the divine memory, begins to burn in you once more. Chapter 2. The echoes of the soul memory beyond the mind. There are memories not born from experience. Thoughts that do not originate from the brain. Knowings that arrive without logic, without cause, without explanation, and yet feel more true than anything we have ever read or been told. These are not fantasies. They are echoes, fragments of something deeper. They are the stirrings of a memory beyond the mind. In the ancient world, such moments were not dismissed. They were revered. For the initiates of forgotten temples, memory was not a function of the intellect, but a property of the soul. It was said that every soul, before it entered this world, drank from the waters of forgetting, not as punishment, but as necessity. To experience life anew, one must forget what came before. But forgetting does not erase. It only buries. And what is buried can be remembered. The Greeks whispered of Lethe, the river of forgetfulness, and of Mnemosyne, goddess of memory, whose name echoed through their sacred hymns. In Egypt, the soul was seen as a traveler through many lives, each chapter written in the book of becoming, each identity but a mask worn over the same flame. The Druids taught that the soul does not learn, it recalls, that wisdom is not gained, but uncovered. And in India, the Vedas spoke of Smriti, the sacred remembrance, the act of aligning the present self with the eternal self that never forgot. So what is divine memory? It is not the recalling of dates or events. It is not the recollection of names or places. Divine memory is a vibration, a resonance. It is what happens when your frequency aligns with a truth so ancient, so fundamental, that it bypasses thought altogether. You do not think it, you become it. And in that becoming, something within you stirs, the same part that dreams in symbols, that aches without knowing why, that meets a stranger and feels a lifeline reawakened across time. But why do we forget? The mind is a filter, not a container. It can only hold what it is trained to perceive. And in the world we have built, with its distractions, its demands, its constant motion, there is no space for the subtle, no silence for the sacred. Divine memory does not shout. It hums, pulses, it waits, and unless we enter into stillness, we cannot hear it. This is why the ancient initiates lived in seclusion, not to escape life, but to remember it, to strip away everything that was not soul, every opinion, every belief, every false identity, until what remained was raw presence. In that presence, memory returned, slowly, gently, through visions, through dreams, through the sudden certainty that one is not learning, but remembering. And what is it we remember? Not just who we were, but what we are. That we are not this body, not this name, not this single moment in time. We are continuity wrapped in momentary form. We are the story speaking itself through lifetimes. And that story has shape, has rhythm, has direction. It carries lessons not yet mastered, patterns not yet dissolved, wisdom not yet embodied. The Akashic traditions speak of a field, a vast, living archive that holds the imprint of every soul's journey, not as punishment, not as surveillance, but as a mirror, a sacred ledger of every choice, every emotion, every path taken or refused. And this mirror is not outside us. It is encoded in our very being. When you touch this memory, you know why certain places feel like home even if you've never been there. You know why certain people awaken grief or love that defies explanation. You know why some wounds feel older than this life, and why some fears arrive without cause. These are not delusions. These are echoes. And the more you listen, the louder they become. But divine memory is not just about the past. It is about purpose. Because when you remember who you are beyond the veil of forgetting, you begin to see your life differently. Not as random, not as struggle, but as design. Every challenge becomes a call to resolve what was left unfinished. Every encounter becomes an echo of a soul contract long written. Every longing becomes a signal from the self you used to be, guiding you home. The initiates of old did not seek enlightenment as an escape. They sought it as a remembering, and that remembering gave birth to clarity. Clarity of action, clarity of purpose, clarity of being. This is what we have lost in the noise. This is what we must reclaim in the silence. The memory is still there. It always was. The question is no longer, what must I learn? The question is, what have I already known and simply forgotten? And once you ask that question, the echoes begin to return. Chapter 3, Living Temples, How the Body Was Transformed in Seclusion. There is a knowledge that cannot be found in books, not because it is hidden, but because it is not written. It is carved not in stone, but in flesh. It pulses beneath the skin. It waits in the marrow. It speaks through the body not as a machine, but as a temple, a sacred architecture built not by chance, but by cosmic design. The ancient initiates understood this. They did not see the body as separate from the divine, nor as something to be transcended or rejected. They saw it as an instrument, finely tuned, exquisitely built, to house consciousness, to channel energy, and to embody the soul's journey through time. But this understanding did not arise in noise. It was born in silence. It was cultivated in solitude. In the deep chambers of the mystery schools, Away from the eyes of the uninitiated, seekers were not taught the body's mysteries through words. They were taught through stillness, through breath, through vibration. To walk the path of divine remembrance, the initiate had to first reclaim the body. Not the body shaped by culture or image or identity, but the original body, the energy body, the temple of subtle channels, hidden centers, and sacred rhythms. In Egypt, they called it the Ka, the vital essence, mirrored by the Ba, the soul in flight. In India, it was the chakra system, vortices of energy spinning along the spine like celestial wheels. In the Andes, shamans spoke of Lanke, the energetic power of right action rooted in the lower body. In all traditions, the message was the same. The body is not an obstacle. It is a gateway, but the body, as it is, cannot always receive divine current. It must be prepared. It must be tuned. And this is why isolation was essential. In solitude, the initiate could listen to the beat of their own heart, to the breath rising and falling like the tides, to the subtle tensions held in the bones. Every sensation, every movement became sacred, every gesture a ritual. Through fasting, the body was emptied. Through breath work, the inner fires were stoked. Through stillness, awareness was anchored. And through movement, not mechanical but conscious, deliberate, sacred, the temple was restored. They understood that the spine was not just bone but staff, that the breath was not just air but spirit, that the voice was not just sound but frequency. Each part of the body was a sigil, a key. And when the body was aligned, when the channels were cleared, something extraordinary began to happen. Energy flowed, not the energy of motion, but the energy of awakening. The serpent stirred. The light coiled at the base of the spine began to rise. And in that rising, the initiate experienced not theory, but transformation. Their perception changed. Their dreams deepened. Their intuition sharpened. And their memory, that divine memory long buried, began to return, not as thought, but as sensation, as knowing, as embodied truth. The temples of old were built to mirror the body, not the other way around. Each chamber aligned with an energy center, each corridor a nerve, each altar a portal. The seeker walked through stone structures to map what was already within them, because to know the divine, they had to become the divine. And the body was the bridge. But this sacred relationship has been forgotten. Modern culture teaches us to numb the body, to push it, reshape it, silence its messages. We treat it as an object, not as a teacher. And so the temple becomes desecrated, the channels blocked, the flame dimmed, but it can be restored. And the path, as it always was, begins in stillness. In the silence of isolation, the initiate relearns the body, not as a form to control, but as a consciousness to commune with. They learn to feel the subtle shifts of energy, to move in harmony with breath, to speak with the cells as if they were sacred companions, because they are. This is not mysticism. This is memory. You were never meant to be a mind housed in flesh. You are awareness shaped into form, and your form is holy. The body is not your prison. It is your path. It is the manuscript written before language, the altar that carries your light, the gate through which the divine expresses itself in this world. To awaken, you must enter it fully. To remember, you must listen to what it has been trying to tell you all along. And once you do, the transformation begins. Not from the mind down, but from the body up. Chapter 4: Divine Amnesia. Why the modern world was built to make you forget. There is a forgetting that feels like sleep, soft, quiet, gentle. The kind that comes upon us in the hush of night, when the mind releases its grip and the body sinks into the arms of dreams. But there is another kind, a forgetting that does not soothe, but dismembers. A forgetting that was not born in the rhythms of nature, but forged in the furnaces of control. It is not the forgetting of time or of name. It is the forgetting of essence. The slow burial of soul beneath layers of instruction, expectation, and illusion. The ancients warned us of this long before our modern world took shape. They did not speak in terms of society or systems, but of shadows, subtle forces that steal memory not by force, but by fascination. They called it divine amnesia, not because the soul forgets its divinity, but because the world teaches it not to look. And so the child, born wide open, sensitive to frequencies the adult mind cannot even register, begins to close. At first, not fully, only slightly. A look from a parent, a correction in school, a laugh from a peer when the child says something too strange, too knowing, too free. The messages are clear, though unspoken. Do not speak of the things you feel but cannot prove. Do not trust the sights and sounds that others cannot see. Do not ask the questions that have no answers. Stay close to the facts. Stay within the frame. Stay ordinary. And so begins the descent. What once was intuitive becomes illogical. What once was vibrational becomes irrational. What once was sacred becomes imaginary. And the child, that bright, pulsing spark of cosmic consciousness in human form, begins to fracture. It happens slowly, like sand slipping through fingers. One belief at a time. One dismissal at a time. One day of forgetting followed by another, until the soul's vast memory becomes a whisper, then an echo, then silence. But this forgetting is not an accident. It is not a consequence of chaos, nor the unavoidable erosion of age. It is engineered, designed, structured into the very fabric of the modern world. Because a soul that remembers is powerful, dangerously so. A soul that remembers does not bow to systems. It does not conform to artificial hierarchies. It does not chase validation from structures built on scarcity, fear, and fragmentation. A soul that remembers walks differently, speaks differently. It listens to different voices, the ones beneath the surface, the ones that do not lie. The architects of the modern world, those who crafted its institutions, its narratives, its invisible rules, knew this. Not all of them consciously, but some. Others simply inherited the machinery of forgetting and kept it running. Schools were built not to awaken, but to prepare. Not to nurture inner truth, but to train attention outward. From the earliest grades, we are taught to memorize, to conform, to seek approval from external authorities. We are not taught to trust the body's knowing. We are not taught to interpret dreams or track synchronicities. We are not shown how to meditate, how to tune in, how to follow the pulse of our own frequency. Instead, we are given grades, clocks, bells, and curricula, tools not of remembrance, but of repression. And then, as if that were not enough, we are drowned in distraction. The noise is constant. Screens, notifications, news, entertainment, an endless loop of images and information. none of it rooted in truth, all of it designed to keep the mind busy, to keep the soul asleep. We are taught to fear silence, to avoid stillness, to fill every gap with something. But it is in those gaps, in the empty spaces, that the soul speaks. The soul does not shout, it whispers, and in a world of noise, the whisper cannot be heard. But perhaps the most insidious layer of this forgetting is not what we are shown, but what we are not. The maps we are not given, the histories we are not taught, the questions we are never encouraged to ask. What if we have been here before? What if time is not linear? What if the ancient past holds not myth, but memory, our memory? What if Atlantis, Lemuria, the temples of Egypt and India and Peru are not just ruins, but mirrors, reflections of a consciousness we once knew and abandoned? Modern history paints a story of progress, a timeline where we evolve from ignorance to intelligence, from myth to science. But this is the great lie, the great inversion, because what if the truth is the opposite? What if we have devolved from cosmic beings of light and memory into fragmented minds locked in flesh and routine? The ancient initiates did not see life as a linear climb. They saw it as a spiral, a cycle of remembering and forgetting, rising and falling, light and shadow. And they knew every age of forgetting is followed by an age of return. But that return does not come through technology or invention, it comes through remembrance. And so the path of the initiate was never about acquiring new information. It was about shedding the lies. It was about peeling back the layers of illusion until what remained was raw, radiant, eternal, the self before the stories, the self before the forgetting. Isolation, as we saw, was the first step. Not to escape the world, but to see it clearly, to recognize the mechanisms of amnesia for what they are. To step outside the matrix, not physically, but energetically. To reclaim the right to remember. Because the greatest power the soul holds is not its ability to think, but its ability to remember. Remember that it chose this life. Remember that every pain carries a purpose. Remember that time bends. Remember that energy listens. Remember that the body is a vessel of light, not limitation. And most of all, remember that it is not alone. No soul enters this world by accident. No seeker finds the path by chance. If you are hearing these words, if something inside you stirs, a tingling, a tightness, a quiet recognition, it is not because you are learning something new. It is because you are remembering something ancient. You are not broken. You are not lost. You are waking up. And the systems that taught you to forget, they are crumbling. Their power fades in the face of awakened souls. That is why they push louder now, harder, faster, because they are afraid. Not of violence, not of rebellion, but of remembrance. Because a world of remembering souls cannot be ruled, cannot be bought, cannot be deceived. It sees through illusion. It heals through frequency. It walks in knowing, not in belief. So if the world feels too loud, too fast, too false, that is not a flaw in you. That is your soul rejecting the program. That is your memory returning. Let it rise like fire in your chest. Let it burn away every name you were given that never fit. Let it melt every mask you wore to survive. Let it whisper the truth that has waited lifetimes to be heard. You are not here to fit in. You are here to remember. And in remembering, you awaken others. This is the beginning of the end of divine amnesia. This is the return. Chapter 5. The Threshold of the Void, What Initiates Faced in the Darkness. There comes a point on the path of awakening when light no longer guides, when the teachings fade, when even the voice of the soul seems to fall silent, not because it has vanished, but because the seeker has arrived at a gate too deep, too ancient, to be illuminated by words. It is not a door made of wood or stone. It is not guarded by flame or sword. It is a threshold, and it opens into the void. This is the moment the ancients feared and revered in equal measure. Not the fear of punishment, nor the reverence of doctrine, but the trembling awe of standing before that which cannot be named, only entered. The void is not emptiness. It is not a vacuum. It is a mirror made of shadow, a chamber where the final illusions dissolve. And what one finds there is not darkness, but truth stripped of form. Every initiate, no matter the path, whether through the temples of Egypt, the caves of Tibet, the pyramids of Mesoamerica, was led, at last, into this chamber. Sometimes literal, often symbolic. The chamber had many names: the womb of Nut, the cave of initiation, the night sea, the desert of silence. But always it served the same purpose: to take everything the seeker thought they were and burn it. You see, awakening is not ascent alone. It is descent first. Descent into that which was buried. Descent into the layers of the self that cling, resist, control. The ego is not evil, but it is terrified of its own dissolving. And so, when brought to the edge of surrender, it cries out, it clings to thought, to sensation, to identity. But in the void, none of those survive. The initiate in darkness sees not with eyes, but with something deeper. Their body may tremble, their breath may shorten. They may feel fear so thick it becomes a presence. But this is not the end. It is the gate, because in that sacred confrontation, something begins to shift. First, the questions, then the silence, then the gaze inward, downward, into the abyss of one's own being. The seeker sees the masks they wore, the roles, the names, the stories, and they begin to fall one by one. With each falling mask, a deeper fear emerges. What will be left if all of this disappears? But the void does not destroy. It reveals. It reveals that beneath every identity lies presence. That beneath every belief lies silence. That beneath the fear of death lies the truth of eternity. It is here, in this sacred unmaking, that the initiate remembers not what they have done, but what they are. The ancients said that within the void lives the Divine Mother, not as deity, but as space itself. The feminine force that does not act, but holds. That does not command, but births. And so the void is not destruction, it is gestation. The self dies, yes, but it dies into itself, like a snake shedding skin, like a seed cracking open, like a star collapsing into light. For many, this stage never comes. Or if it does, they turn back, because to step into the void is to lose the world, to lose what you thought was real, to lose your own reflection. But those who cross the threshold, not by force but by surrender, return changed. They speak differently. They listen more than they speak. They see through masks without judgment. They walk slowly, not because they are unsure, but because they carry something immense. They have met the dark, and the dark spoke, and it did not condemn. It remembered them. There is no curriculum for this.
No manual.
No map. Only the knowing, buried deep in the soul, that when all else fails, When every truth collapses, when every light fades, there is still something left. And that something is you. Not the you who performs, not the you who fears, but the you who has always watched, who has never spoken aloud, yet always whispered from beneath the noise. The void does not give answers, it gives you back to yourself. And so the final gate is not found in temples. It is not bestowed by masters. It is entered in silence, crossed in darkness, and marked by a single realization. You are not the one who seeks. You are the one who remembers. Chapter 6. The Return, How Ancient Seers Re-entered the World Transformed. There is a silence that begins in solitude and ends in radiance. For the ancient initiates, the path was never meant to be permanent isolation. The cave was not a destination, the temple chamber not an escape. They were crucibles, vessels of transformation, places where the old self dissolved and something timeless stepped forward. And when the process was complete, when the soul had walked through shadow, silence, and fire, there came the return. But it was not a return as we think of it, not a resumption of the former life, the former roles. It was a re-entry into the world as something entirely new, a return not to society, but to presence, not to noise, but to clarity. The initiate had crossed thresholds no eye could see, and in doing so, they became the threshold itself, a bridge between worlds, a living reminder of what most had forgotten. Imagine such a being. They walk among others, but they are not driven by approval. They speak, but their words do not seek to convince. They simply ring with resonance. Their actions are deliberate, slow, but their energy moves like wind through rooms, touching what cannot be seen. These were the seers, the sages, the healers. They re-entered not to be worshipped, but to serve. But what does it mean to serve once the veil has been lifted? The initiate returns not to teach facts, but to embody frequencies, not to argue, but to emanate. Their very presence becomes a teaching not of intellect, but of vibration. They do not need to explain the soul. They awaken it. In silence, they stir the memory of others. In listening, they anchor forgotten truths. In being, they open doors. The ancient mystery schools had no graduation. There was no title, no ceremony, no certificate. There was only the walk, the quiet walk back into the world. Eyes clear, heart open, body light. The initiate had touched the void and survived. More than survived, they had emerged luminous, not unscarred, but untouched by fear. Their scars became sigils, their wounds, gates of compassion. Because this is what true initiation creates. Not power over others, but power to remain fully present. In the storm, they stand. In the chaos, they do not react, they remember. Their memory is not historical, but vibrational. They carry the hum of the source within them. They walk through crowds, through cities, through centuries, and wherever they go, the field shifts. But there is one more truth the ancients knew. Not everyone will see them. Not everyone will recognize the light. Some will mock it. Some will resist it. Some will label it madness or delusion. But those who are ready, those whose souls have begun to stir, will know. Not through logic, not through proof, but through resonance. A sudden stillness when the initiate speaks. A dream that comes after touching their energy. A sense that something ancient has entered the room. This is the work of those who return, to seed the field, to awaken the dormant, to mirror the light others have forgotten they carry. And they do this not by effort but by frequency. They are not missionaries. They are memory. And perhaps this is the final mystery, that the path was never about escape. It was about return, to walk into the heart of illusion, not to be consumed by it, but to hold the torch steady until others remember the way. And so we ask, as all initiates once did, what is your role in the remembering? Are you the seeker, the one descending, the one listening? Or perhaps, have you already returned? And if so, what will you do with the light you now carry?